This explainer is brought to you by Real Estate Rank IQ. Today, we're tackling a huge question. How can factory-built housing help close America's massive housing supply gap and do it faster? We all know the country is facing a major housing crisis. But what if this solution wasn't found on a muddy construction site, but on a clean, efficient assembly line? Let's dive in.
First things first, we've got to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this problem. This isn't some small dip we can just bounce back from in a year or two. No, we are facing a deep, systemic shortage that is putting historic pressure on the entire market.
Okay, let's just start with the biggest number. At the end of 2023, the US was short nearly 5 million homes. Think about that. That's not just a housing gap, that's a canyon. And it's affecting everything from the price you pay for rent to the stability of the whole economy.
Now you're probably thinking, okay, so just build more houses, right? Well, not so fast. There's a huge catch. We have a massive labor shortage. Just to keep up with what we expect to need in 2025, builders have to somehow find and attract almost 500,000 brand new workers. That's on top of replacing people who retire. It's a gigantic bottleneck that the old way of building just can't seem to solve.
And this is why it matters to you, to me, to everyone. When you can't build enough houses to meet demand, what happens? Prices go through the roof. The typical mortgage payment is now hovering around $2,600 a month. That's putting the dream of homeownership completely out of reach for millions of people. This isn't just some abstract industry problem, it's a real-life affordability crisis.
So if the traditional way of building is hitting a wall, what's the alternative? We need a mental shift. We need to start thinking about building homes less like a construction project and more like manufacturing a product. And that's exactly where the factory-built advantage comes in. It's a modern, tech-forward solution to these really deep problems.
And boom, right away you see how this hits that labor crisis head-on. By moving a ton of the skilled work into a controlled factory setting, modular construction can slash the number of workers needed on-site by up to 40%. You can literally build more with fewer people. It's an absolute game changer. The next huge advantage? Speed. It's just simple math. The foundation work is happening on-site at the exact same time the modules are being precision-built in the factory. By doing those two things in parallel, you can cut project timelines by 20, 30, even 50%. For an investor, that means money starts coming in way sooner. For a family, it means getting the keys to their new home months earlier.
All right, let's talk about the money. Now, a single one-off modular home might not be dramatically cheaper, but the real magic happens when you do this at scale. By creating a standardized system, a kit of parts, and building in volume, developers can consistently hit cost savings of up to 20%. That comes from buying materials in bulk, way less waste, and no more rain delays.
And hey, this isn't just some theory on a whiteboard. Check out these real-world wins. You've got affordable housing in California coming in 30% cheaper and in half the time. In West Oakland, they stacked a 110-unit apartment building in just 10 days. Even big-time brands like Marriott are all in, using modular to cut months off their build schedules. The proof is out there.
So the advantages are pretty clear, right? It's faster, uses less labor, and can be cheaper. The big question then becomes, how do you actually do this at scale? It's all about moving from building one-off custom projects to creating a repeatable, industrialized system. So here's the playbook for how the pros get it done.
This is the 5-step playbook the winning companies are using. First, they standardize their building system. Think of it like a set of high-tech Legos. Second, they control the whole process. Third, they focus on one market or one type of building instead of trying to do everything. Fourth, and this is so important, they design for logistics first. The size of the module is determined by what can fit on a truck, not the other way around. And finally, they get their financing to match the factory process, not the old-school construction schedule.
Now, even with all these benefits, I know what some of you are thinking. There are still a lot of old myths and misconceptions floating around about factory-built homes. So it's time we tackle those doubts head-on with some cold, hard facts. This is the big one, isn't it? The first thing that pops into so many people's minds is, oh, you mean a trailer, right? A mobile home? And the answer is a hard no. That idea could not be more out of date.
Okay, this is probably the single most important slide to understand. Modular homes are built to the exact same local and state building codes as any stick-built home in your neighborhood. They're put on a permanent foundation, and they get financed and appraised just like a traditional house. Manufactured housing, what people often think of as a trailer, is different. It's built to a federal HUD code, it stays on a chassis, and it's often financed like personal property, kind of like an RV or a car. They are totally different animals.
So what about that other myth, the one about quality? You have to ask yourself, what's a better way to build? In the rain, snow, and mud with materials exposed to the elements, or inside a climate-controlled factory with dedicated quality assurance teams and precision tools? The fact is, the factory environment almost always leads to a higher quality, tighter, and more durable home. Okay, another huge question, especially these days. What's the environmental story? Is this actually a greener way to build? The answer is a resounding yes, but to see why, you have to look at how wasteful the old way is. Get a load of this number. In a single year, traditional construction in the US generated about 145 million tons of debris that got dumped in a landfill. It's an unbelievably wasteful process. In a factory, you can order materials with precision, recycle offcuts easily, and just generally run a much tighter ship. It dramatically cuts down on waste and the building's overall carbon footprint.
All right, so we've covered the what, the why, and we've busted the myths. Now for the really important part, the how. If you're a decision maker, this is your actionable playbook for how you can get in on this solution.
If you're with a public agency or a university, listen up. Stop reinventing the wheel for every single project. Settle on a standard kit of parts you can use over and over. When you ask for bids, make sure your RFPs reward factories for their speed and capacity, not just the lowest price. And you've got to get your finance department to align payments with factory milestones. That predictability is what lets a factory really scale up. For you developers and general contractors, your new mantra is commit early. You have to lock in your modular system right at the beginning, during schematic design. Trying to make changes later on just throws a giant wrench in the assembly line. And treat logistics, the trucks, the cranes, the traffic, like it's the most important part of the job, because it is. Oh, and if you can, bundle a few projects together to buy in bulk. That's where the big savings are. And finally, for the money people, the lenders, the investors, it's time to shift your perspective. Don't just underwrite a single project. Underwrite the manufacturing system and the factory's track record. Demand the quality control paperwork to lower your risk. And most importantly, make sure your financial models actually capture the massive upside of finishing a project months faster and getting to positive cash flow way ahead of schedule. That's the core of the value here. So, let's just boil it all down. The market doesn't just need more houses, it needs a fundamentally new way of building them. It needs a process that's faster, way more predictable, and a whole lot less dependent on a labor force that just isn't there anymore. Factory-built housing checks every single one of those boxes. So here's the call to action, plain and simple. If you are a developer, an agency, or an institution with projects that need to be delivered in that 2026 to 2028 window, the time to build your modular program isn't next year, it's this quarter. Lock in your design kit, line up your factory partner, and get that crane on the schedule. This housing gap isn't going to close itself, and the assembly line is fired up and ready to start building the solution.